Some stories don't begin with flashing lights or grand announcements. They begin quietly, on a forgotten country road where no one is supposed to notice what happens. A lone black traveler drove that road one evening, unaware that the shadows waiting for him were not random but carefully laid, a trap born from years of silence and corruption. What unfolded that night would shatter the illusion of safety, expose the rot beneath a small-town surface, and prove that one man's dignity could strike harder than any weapon. This story is not only about cruelty and betrayal, it is about the moment when hidden truth collides with public courage. If you believe these stories need to be told, give this video a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you think about injustice, and let us know where you are watching from, because your voice brings light to the darkness that others want to hide. Angela Brooks had always believed that roads carried memories, that certain stretches of asphalt could hold onto the stories of those who travel them. The Tulane County road that wound between pine trees and fields had been her route home for years, a place where she could let the weight of hospice work slide off her shoulders before pulling into her driveway. That evening the air was thick with heat, the kind that made the world shimmer, and the cicadas shrilled as if they were warning her to turn back. She drove with the window cracked, the smell of dust and pine sap swirling in with the steady hum of her old sedan. Her shift at the hospice had been long and emotionally heavy. She had sat beside Mr. Leonard, an elderly veteran who had clung to her hand as cancer pulled him toward the end. Even after years of watching life slip away, the moments still weighed on her. She thought about his children who had stood outside the room, unable to face the last minutes, about how often she became the stand-in family for those who passed. She was tired, but not resentful. Helping people through their final moments gave her purpose, but it also left her soul raw, like skin rubbed too thin. That was why, when she saw the truck pulled over on the shoulder ahead, hood raised with what appeared to be steam curling into the sky, her instinct was immediate. Someone might need help. Someone's grandfather could be stuck in the heat, waiting hours for assistance. She eased off the accelerator, her eyes narrowing as she drew closer. The truck looked weathered, the kind that belonged more to a construction site than a family outing. Its paint faded, tires thick with dust. She glanced into her rearview mirror before guiding her car onto the gravel shoulder about 20 feet back. Her tires crackled over stones before she stopped, shifting the car into park. She hesitated a moment, reaching into her purse for her phone, slipping it into her scrub pocket where she could reach it quickly. She opened her door, the cicadas' chorus hitting her ears as her white nursing shoes touched gravel. The crunch beneath her steps sounded far too loud in the quiet evening. She raised her voice politely, though cautious. "Hello? Do you need help?" Her words carried into the open air, but bounced back unanswered. The hood was up, but no one was there. She took a few more careful steps toward the truck, the heat pushing against her skin, the silence growing heavier. Then something shifted in her perception. She looked closer at the haze curling from the truck's engine. It didn't move like steam. Steam would rise steadily, hot and wet, but this hung in the air differently, like dust settling after movement. The realization stabbed her gut cold. That wasn't steam. It was dust kicked up by the truck when it had pulled into place, staged to look like a breakdown. She stopped in her tracks, every instinct screaming at her to turn and run back to her car. But before she could move, 3 figures stepped out from behind the truck. They wore leather vests marked with the snarling skull insignia of the Iron Vultures, their boots grinding against the gravel with deliberate menace. One of them grinned, revealing teeth yellowed from tobacco. Another cracked his knuckles, as if already relishing what was about to happen. Her pulse hammered as she glanced over her shoulder, hoping her car was still within reach, but 2 more men emerged from the tree line, blocking her retreat. They had her boxed in. She tried to remain calm, raising her hands in placation. "I don't want any trouble. I'll just go." The air smelled of pine sap and sweat, her fear mixing with the rough laughter that echoed through the trees. Sunlight filtered weakly through the thick canopy, making the world a shifting pattern of light and shadow. The men shoved her against the trunk of a massive sycamore tree, its pale bark cold and unyielding against her cheek. One of them spat on the ground as he pulled coarse rope from a pack. "This will teach you to know your place," he snarled, forcing her arms behind her back. The rope cut into her skin immediately, the fibers rough and biting as they looped tight around her wrists. Another circled her torso, wrapping again and again until her chest was squeezed so tightly she could barely expand her lungs. She gasped, desperate for air, her body straining against the restraints, but the rope only bit deeper. She whispered, "Please, I'm a nurse. I help people. I've probably cared for some of your family members." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to remain steady, to cling to some semblance of dignity. The response was a sharp slap across her face, the sting blooming hot as tears blurred her vision. "Shut your mouth," one growled. The others laughed, circling her like wolves. Through tear-blurred eyes she saw another car creeping slowly down the road in the distance, beyond the trees. Her heart surged with hope. She shouted, her voice raw, but the driver glanced once and then sped away. The sound of the engine faded like the echo of abandonment. "Nobody's coming for you," one of the bikers taunted, his words low and venomous. Another drew back his fist and drove it into her ribs. She gasped but bit down on her lip, refusing to scream. She tasted blood, copper sharp on her tongue, and clung to silence. They wanted her to cry out, to break, and she would not give them that satisfaction. They took turns striking her, careful not to leave marks on her face, their cruelty calculated to leave her looking unharmed to any casual observer, while her body bore the bruises. Every blow radiated agony, her chest tightening further against the ropes, each breath a shallow, painful effort. Her legs trembled, her knees buckled, but the ropes held her upright against the tree, forcing her to endure. The leader crouched low, grabbing her chin roughly. "This is what happens when you forget your place," he hissed, his tobacco-stained teeth close enough that she could smell the rot. She stared back at him through her tears, refusing to look away despite the terror clawing at her insides. "Maybe a few days tied here will remind you." His grin widened as he shoved her head back against the bark. The rope dug into her skin, scraping raw spots into her wrists and shoulders. Her back screamed with pain as blood trickled down from where the bark had cut through her scrubs. Their laughter echoed as they began to walk away, fading into the distance with the sound of motorcycles starting up, their engines rumbling triumphantly. She pulled at the ropes, twisting her wrists until skin tore, but the knots were expertly tied. Each movement only deepened the pain, the fibers digging into flesh. Sweat and blood made the ropes sticky against her skin. She sagged against the tree, her breath ragged. The cicadas droned above, indifferent to her suffering. She whispered prayers, clutching each word as if it were a lifeline. "Our Father, who art in heaven." Angela's emergency signal. It pulsed red with coordinates that marked a location deep in the county logging roads, far from any place she should have been at that hour. He froze for a fraction of a second, the way a soldier does when instinct collides with dread, and then he moved with precision. The pieces of his kit were reassembled almost on reflex, every movement practiced and efficient. He shoved his medical kit into his go bag, slung the strap across his chest, and bolted out the door. The screen door slammed behind him as his boots pounded across the porch. His truck roared to life, tires spitting gravel as he tore down the driveway and onto the main road. Fear pressed in, but years of training reshaped it into focus. He didn't allow panic to scatter his thoughts. Instead, he broke the situation down into scenarios. Her location, the time since the signal, the likelihood of injuries, the potential for ambush. Each calculation narrowed his breathing into controlled rhythm. She was alive, he told himself. She had to be alive. She had pressed that ring, which meant she had endured long enough to send for him. The thought of her bound somewhere, suffering, only tightened his resolve. He drove hard, the truck's engine growling as he veered onto the dirt turnoff toward the logging roads. The tires kicked up dust that blurred his rearview mirror. His eyes scanned the ground even as he drove, noting fresh tire tracks pressed deep into the soil, more than one set, heavier in some places, motorcycles by the look of them. The tread patterns told him at least 5 or 6 bikes had come through, along with a pickup truck, that had blocked the road. He slowed near the spot where the truck sat abandoned. It stood still up in mock distress. He killed his engine and got out silently, crouching by the vehicle. He touched the engine block. Cold. The trap had been set hours ago, prepared for the perfect victim. His jaw clenched as he noticed flecks of blood on the gravel nearby, tiny dark droplets that confirmed she had been hurt. Drag marks scarred the earth, weaving toward the trees. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but his body remained calm. He followed the signs like he had followed enemy tracks in distant deserts, every detail speaking to him. Branches broken at shoulder height showed where her body had been hauled through. Leaves disturbed, a scuff of shoe rubber, a faint smear of blood on bark, all painted the story of her struggle. He moved silently, his steps careful, avoiding twigs and loose stones that might betray sound. The forest thickened, shadows shifting in the fading light. Then he heard it, a voice, faint but steady, rising through the stillness. Angela's voice. She was whispering prayers, the sound threadbare with exhaustion but defiant, carrying through the trees like a signal flare for him alone. His fists tightened as rage pressed against his ribs, but he held it back, channeling it into razor focus. He pushed forward until he reached the clearing. The sight nearly broke him. Angela hung against the massive sycamore tree, her dark skin bruised and torn, scrubs ripped, rope cutting deep into her wrists and shoulders. Her body sagged, but her lips still moved with whispered words. He stepped out of the shadows, voice low, controlled, almost breaking, but steady enough to reach her without startling. "Angela," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, wide with disbelief, then relief, and she breathed his name like it was life itself. Marcus. He was at her side in an instant, pulling his tactical knife from its sheath and sawing through the ropes. The fibers snapped one by one until her arms fell forward. He caught her gently, lowering her against the tree, his hands soft despite the storm building inside him at the sight of her injuries. "I'm here, baby. I've got you." Her wrists were raw, blood crusted where the ropes had rubbed skin away. He tore a strip of cloth from his shirt to wrap them quickly. He gave her small sips of water, careful not to overwhelm her weakened body. His mind worked 2 tracks at once, tending to her while preparing for what might come next. And then the sound reached him. Motorcycles, distant but approaching. Angela's eyes widened in fear, her cracked lips whispering, "They're coming back." Marcus's pulse stayed level, his voice steady. "Stay still." He cut the last ropes away and positioned her against the massive trunk, hidden from immediate sight. He moved her gently into the shadows. 3 bikers entered the clearing, laughing, passing a bottle between them. They froze when they saw the cut ropes dangling from the sycamore. "What the hell?" one started to shout. Marcus was already in motion. He scooped a length of rope from the ground and swung it low, catching the nearest biker across the shins. The man pitched forward, face first toward the earth, and Marcus's knee drove into his falling face with a crack of bone and teeth. The second swung a heavy chain, the metal flashing in the light. Marcus stepped inside the arc, grabbed the man's arm, and used his momentum to slam him headfirst into the sycamore. The impact reverberated, and the man dropped unconscious. The third fumbled with a knife, his stance clumsy and untrained. Marcus knocked the blade aside with his forearm, then struck 3 times in fluid succession: throat, solar plexus, knee. His time in war zones had taught him that quiet moments often held the greatest danger. He whispered reassurance into Angela's ear, telling her to stay hidden behind the sycamore's thick trunk while he scouted. But she gripped his sleeve with surprising strength and shook her head weakly. She didn't want him to leave her sight. He crouched beside her, water canteen in hand, giving her another sip, his thumb brushing across the raw rope burns on her wrists. His voice was calm, but inside his chest, fury smoldered. He had seen brutality before, but nothing stung like the sight of his wife tied and beaten by men who thought cruelty was a language of power. Angela's lips parted, whispering that more of them would come. She had seen the way they looked at her, with ownership and hate, and she knew 3 men wandering back into the woods meant others were close. Marcus nodded. His knife still hung ready at his side, but he thought ahead, considering what he could use in these woods, how to turn environment into weapon. He moved the biker's weapons, chains, knives, a rusted pistol without a round in the chamber, out of reach, securing them behind the tree roots where Angela sat. He dragged the unconscious men into the shadows, out of sight, then covered them with leaves and brush. He would deal with them later, but now the priority was Angela and whoever else prowled nearby. He squatted low and scanned the drag marks in the dirt, seeing the paths clearly. 6 men had taken her, 3 now down, which meant at least 3 more somewhere between the truck and the road. And if these gangs worked the way he suspected, more would be on call, drawn by engines like moths to flame. He calculated timing, running scenarios in his head. His instincts screamed to move Angela now, but the sound of fresh motorcycles rumbled faintly, then grew louder, echoing off the trees. Angela's eyes widened. She grasped his forearm, whispering, "They're coming back." Marcus lowered her against the sycamore again, crouching in front of her. He gripped her face gently, making her look him in the eye. "Stay low. No matter what you hear, don't move until I come back for you." She nodded, though her body shook. He kissed her forehead quickly, then melted into the undergrowth like a shadow. He crouched near the clearing's edge just as 3 more bikers entered, their flashlights slicing through the dim light. Their boots scuffed over roots, their laughter cruel, careless. "Where'd they go?" one muttered, noticing the cut ropes dangling from the tree. "Somebody freed her." "Can't be far," another replied, his voice gruff, chain swinging idly at his side. Marcus moved silently along the tree line, his body low, controlled breathing slowing his pulse until it beat in rhythm with the forest. One of the bikers stepped closer to the sycamore, lifting his light toward Angela's outline, but she stayed hidden in the shadow of the trunk, just as Marcus had told her. Before the man could peer further, Marcus struck. He lunged from behind, wrapping his arm around the biker's neck in a chokehold, cutting off airflow and dragging him backward into the brush. The man's flashlight clattered silently against moss as his knees buckled. Marcus tightened, feeling the body go limp before lowering it soundlessly. 2 left. The others spun at the faint rustle, lights flashing. "You hear that?" one barked. His companion raised a knife, its edge catching pale moonlight. Marcus waited, letting them move closer together, using their own paranoia against them. He picked up a handful of gravel and tossed it into the underbrush opposite his position. Both men snapped their flashlights in that direction, stepping toward the noise, distracted. Marcus surged forward, low and fast, his boot slamming into the back of one man's knee. The biker collapsed with a grunt, knife flying from his hand. Marcus pivoted, elbow striking his temple with a dull crack. The second swung his chain wildly, the link slicing the air where Marcus's head had been seconds before. Marcus ducked, stepped in, and caught the man's arm mid-swing. With practiced precision, he twisted the wrist, trapping the chain against the man's body and using momentum to drive him chest-first into the sycamore. The impact reverberated through the clearing. The biker slumped dazed, but Marcus pressed forward, pinning him with a knee and jerking the chain from his hand. He looped it quickly, binding the man's arms before zip-tying his wrists with ruthless efficiency. Angela watched from behind the tree, her heart in her throat. Every movement Marcus made was calculated, fluid, like a dance he had rehearsed countless times in training grounds far from these woods. She had always known him as steady, quiet, a man of few words, but here he was something else, unyielding, a force of precision and survival. Within minutes, the clearing was silent again. Marcus dragged the last 2 unconscious men into the brush with the others, concealing them under thick leaves. He returned to Angela, crouching beside her, his hands soft once more as he checked her breathing. "You're safe," he murmured. But even as he said it, his mind reeled with the discovery of that sheriff's auxiliary ring he had pocketed earlier. These weren't just random bikers. They had protection, possibly even orders from within the county. He knew now this wasn't over. Angela touched his arm, whispering, "What happens now?" Marcus helped her to her feet slowly, supporting her as her legs wobbled under bruises and exhaustion. The night air pressed heavy, thick with the smell of oil and pine, and the faint hum of cicadas carried through the trees like an uneasy chorus. Marcus's eyes scanned constantly, sharp as blades, and though his hands were gentle when he steadied Angela, they never strayed far from the knife tucked against his belt. He replayed the moment in the clearing, the insignia ring he had pocketed from one of the men. Sheriff's auxiliary, unmistakable. It wasn't just a trinket, it was a warning. Those men had not acted alone, and worse, their violence carried the shield of authority. Angela broke the silence with a whisper, her voice hoarse. "You think the sheriff knows?" Marcus kept his tone level, though every instinct screamed yes. "He's not just aware," Marcus muttered, "he's part of it." The way the bikers had moved, their confidence in dragging a woman from a roadside, their boldness in leaving tracks unhidden, it reeked of protection. No gang dared move that freely without the knowledge someone powerful had their back. He tightened his grip on Angela, urging her forward. In the distance, faint light glimmered through the trees. Headlights, bouncing gently over gravel. Angela's heart lurched. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Marcus eased her into the brush, crouching low, pulling her with him, into a fallen log as the beams grew brighter. An old patrol truck rolled slowly down the road, its emblem catching moonlight, the sheriff's office. The vehicle stopped directly across the clearing entrance, engine idling. Sheriff Warren Callahan stepped out, his broad frame silhouetted in the glow of headlights, his hat pulled low over a face carved from suspicion and arrogance. His boots crunched on gravel as he surveyed the woods. "You boys done yet?" he called, his drawl cutting through the silence. "Better have her tied proper this time." Angela's breath caught, her nails digging into Marcus's arm. The sheriff knew. He wasn't cleaning up a crime. He was orchestrating it. Marcus's jaw clenched as he studied the man. Callahan wandered closer to the tree-line, flashlight in hand, scanning, searching. When he found the cut ropes, he stopped cold. His face hardened, lips curling into something between anger and fear. He muttered low curses, then barked out, "Where the hell are you?" No answer came. He knelt, touched the broken ties, and his expression shifted into realization. Someone had interfered. He straightened, hand drifting to the revolver at his side, scanning with sharper eyes. Marcus pressed Angela deeper into the shadows, shielding her with his body. Every instinct told him to stay silent, but the ground was dangerous. One wrong sound could expose them both. Callahan took another slow step, sweeping his light over the brush, nearing their hiding place. Marcus's muscles coiled, ready to strike if discovered. Angela held her breath, so long she felt her lungs burn. Just as the sheriff drew closer, a crack echoed from deeper in the woods. A branch snapped under the weight of a deer darting through. Callahan swung his flashlight toward the sound, muttered, and spat into the dirt. "Worthless drunks can't finish a job." He turned back to his truck, climbed in, and grabbed the radio mic. His voice carried in the still night. "They're gone. Somebody cut her loose. Get me every man awake, now. Sweep the back roads, the quarry, and the gas stop. Whoever's in my county thinks they're clever. They won't make it past sunrise." He slammed the mic down, gunned the engine, and rolled off into the dark. Angela sagged against Marcus, relief flooding her body, but fear lingered. "He was talking about us," she whispered. "They're hunting." Marcus nodded grimly. "And they won't stop." He helped her rise, and together they edged back onto the path, moving with quiet urgency. Every shadow now felt like an ambush, every rustle a spy. The sheriff's words confirmed what Marcus suspected. The entire county was compromised. The gang wasn't rogue. It was the sheriff's hand in the dark. Angela stumbled once, and Marcus lifted her into his arms despite her protests. Her weight slowed him, but he carried her steadily, his determination unbroken. He had carried worse burdens in battle, and nothing in his life would matter more than carrying her out of this cursed place alive. After nearly an hour of weaving through brush and back trails, the faint orange glow of a gas station sign pierced the horizon. Angela stirred in his arms, whispering, "Light." Marcus slowed, lowering her gently. They crouched at the tree line, watching. The small roadside station was open, a single clerk inside, wiping down the counter. It seemed like salvation, but Marcus's instincts screamed caution. Sheriff Callahan's orders echoed in his mind. The gas stop was a trap. Angela followed his gaze and understood, her voice trembling. "We can't go in, can we?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet." Instead, he guided her around the back, toward the dumpsters where shadows cloaked them. They crouched, observing as minutes later another patrol truck pulled up. 2 deputies stepped out, spoke briefly with the clerk, then leaned against the doorframe as if waiting. They were hunting indeed, their patience stretched across the empty night. Marcus studied their stances, their complacency. One smoked a cigarette, the ember glowing like a beacon. The other fiddled with his belt, bored, but both had weapons. They were not here by coincidence. Angela whispered, "We'll starve out here." Marcus touched her cheek, voice steady but quiet. Angela shifted uncomfortably, her breath ragged. "Marcus," she whispered, "if we don't move soon, I can't." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Marcus stared at the deputies lounging near the door, their arrogance evident in their casual posture. One leaned against the doorway with a smirk, sipping coffee, while the other tapped at his phone, his badge glinting in the artificial light. They weren't watching for random travelers. They were waiting for her. He clenched his jaw, then gently pressed her shoulder. "Stay low. Don't make a sound." He crept forward, eyes trained on the window where the clerk moved with nervous energy, wiping the same counter over and over. Something about the man seemed off. Marcus studied him longer, then noticed it. The clerk's glances, quick and darting, always toward the deputies, never toward the customers that might arrive. He was signaling, a cog in the machine, part of the sheriff's net. Marcus eased back, heart pounding. They couldn't risk entering. He returned to Angela, crouched and whispered, "The clerk's in on it. We go inside, we're finished." Angela closed her eyes, despair flickering across her bruised face. Her stomach growled audibly, reminding them both of the hours that had passed since she'd eaten. Marcus scanned the perimeter, his soldiers' instincts noting the trucks parked in the lot. 2 pickups, dusty and dented, likely belonging to locals who had stopped for late-night supplies. One had its back loaded with toolboxes, ropes, and a tarp. That tarp sparked an idea. If they could get into the truck bed unseen, they might ride unnoticed into town, or at least far enough from the deputy's net. He leaned close. "Angela, we're going to borrow a ride." She blinked at him in disbelief, then nodded, trusting his plan. They slinked closer, using shadows as cover, and crouched behind the truck. Marcus carefully lifted the tarp, helping Angela settle beneath it. She winced with every movement, but she bit down on her pain, determination stronger than her body's protests. Marcus climbed in after her, tugged the tarp back into place, and together they held still, silent in the darkness. Minutes passed before the truck's owner returned, humming tunelessly, tossing his purchases into the cab. The engine rumbled to life, the vibration shaking the bed. Angela clutched Marcus's arm as the vehicle rolled forward, carrying them into the unknown. For a brief moment, relief washed through her, until she realized the truck wasn't leaving town. It circled slowly, pulling into the station's fuel pump. Through a tiny gap in the tarp, Marcus glimpsed the clerk rushing out, speaking hurriedly to the driver. Then one deputy approached, tapping the side of the truck bed. Marcus's hand flew to his knife. He braced for discovery, body coiled to spring, but the driver laughed, waved his arms, and drove on, apparently convincing the deputy of his harmlessness. The truck rumbled onto the open road, finally leaving the gas stop behind. Angela exhaled shakily. That was too close. Marcus squeezed her hand, whispering, "We're not safe yet." The ride stretched on, every bump and turn magnifying their tension. After what felt like an eternity, the truck slowed and turned into a gravel lot. Marcus peeked again and recognized the silhouette of a farmhouse. The vehicle stopped, the driver cut the engine, and the cab door opened. "Out," a gruff voice commanded. Marcus froze. The driver wasn't speaking to them. He was addressing someone else. Heavy boots thudded against gravel, and Marcus listened. More voices emerged, low and conspiratorial. "Sheriff, says they were spotted near the woods. Shouldn't be long now. Marcus's blood ran cold. Their driver wasn't innocent. He was delivering supplies to the very men hunting them. Angela gripped his arm, panic rising. "What do we do?" she mouthed. Marcus's mind worked furiously. They could not remain hidden. The men would check the truck eventually. Their only chance was surprise. He motioned for silence, slid the knife free, and waited until the men's voices drifted a few steps away. Then, with one swift motion, he pushed the tarp aside, pulled Angela out, and guided her toward the barn just yards from the farmhouse. They darted across the lot, hearts hammering, and slipped into the barn shadows. Inside, the air was thick with hay and dust, the faint sound of livestock stirring in their stalls. Marcus barred the door with a wooden beam, then turned to Angela, whispering, "We need to regroup. They're everywhere." She nodded, leaning against a hay bale, exhaustion etched into her face. "I can't keep running like this," she admitted. Marcus knelt before her, his expression fierce. "Then we stop running. We start fighting back." Another laughed under his breath. "Ain't no farmer around here that locks barns. They're in there." The certainty in the man's tone chilled Angela more than the night air. Marcus's mind churned, searching for a way out. He glanced toward the far wall and spotted a loose plank near the ground. If they could pry it open, maybe they could slip out unseen, but every second of delay risked the deputies breaking through the front. He crouched, pulling at the wood, but the nails groaned loud enough to echo in the rafters. The sound drew immediate attention. "Hear that?" one deputy hissed. Inside, in a heartbeat, Marcus grabbed Angela's arm, pulling her behind a stack of hay bales as the men outside rammed the door. Wood splintered, the bar cracked, and a flood of lantern light spilled inside. Marcus steadied his knife, muscles tense, as three figures entered, rifle slung casually, but fingers eager on triggers. "Come out, Marcus," one taunted, his voice dripping with smugness. "Sheriff says we don't need her alive, just you." Angela's eyes widened in horror, but Marcus steadied her with a look that said, "I won't let them touch you." The men fanned out, boots crunching straw, shadows stretching across the floorboards. Marcus knew they couldn't overpower armed deputies head-on. He scanned the barn quickly, his soldiers eye-catching a rusted pitchfork leaning near the stalls. With deliberate quiet, he slid toward it, keeping Angela shielded behind him. When the nearest deputy's rifle swung toward their hiding spot, Marcus lunged. He slammed the pitchfork into the man's chest, not deep enough to kill, but enough to send him crashing back with a howl of pain. The rifle clattered, Marcus snatched it midair, and in one fluid motion aimed it at the other two. "Drop them," he roared. His voice cut through the barn like thunder, fueled by years of command and survival. For a second, they hesitated, shock written on their faces at the sudden reversal. Then one lowered his weapon, but the other sneered, spitting on the ground. "You think this changes anything? Sheriff owns this whole county." The defiance made Marcus's jaw tighten, but he kept the barrel steady, forcing them to retreat a step. Angela rose shakily, her voice hoarse but steady. "If he owns the county, then he fears the truth, and we're going to bring it to light." The deputies laughed bitterly, one muttering, "Truth don't mean a damn thing when no one dares listen." Marcus knew the man wasn't entirely wrong, but the ring in his pocket, the insignia tying the sheriff to the gang, was leverage. If they could escape with their lives and find someone outside the county to see it, maybe justice could still be possible. He backed them toward the door, Angela at his side, the rifle never wavering. But as they stepped into the cool night air, a slow clap cut through the silence. The sheriff himself stood under the glow of the farmhouse porch light, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the gravel. His hat was tipped low, but the smirk on his face was visible even in the dim glow. "Impressive soldier," he drawled. "You've still got some fight in you, but you forgot whose game you're playing." Marcus's stomach tightened. The deputies at his back grinned, their fear dissolving now that their master was near. Angela clutched Marcus's arm, whispering, "We can't fight him here." The sheriff's eyes locked on Angela, cold and calculating. That woman's been nothing but trouble since the diner. Should have left her to bleed. Now you've dragged her into a war she can't win. Marcus raised the rifle higher, his voice steel. "This isn't your county anymore. The moment word gets out, you're finished." The sheriff chuckled, stepping closer. "Word gets out? To who?" Every driver on that road looked away. Every clerk, every deputy, every farmer. They all know who feeds them, who owns their land, who buries their secrets. "You think they'll risk that for her?" He pointed at Angela like she was already a ghost. The weight of his words hung heavy, but Marcus refused to falter. He adjusted his stance, finger brushing the trigger, when Angela suddenly spoke, her tone cutting sharp through the tension. "Then let's make this simple. If no one here will stand against you, we'll drag you into the light ourselves." The sheriff's smirk faltered, if only for a fraction of a second. He wasn't used to defiance, especially from someone he had dismissed as weak. He tilted his head, studying her like a predator reassessing prey. "You got guts, lady. Shame you won't live long enough to use them." With a whistle, more figures emerged from the shadows. Half a dozen bikers, iron vultures, patches gleaming under the lantern glow. The deputies laughed, emboldened by the reinforcements. Marcus's grip on the rifle tightened, his body tensing for a fight he knew they couldn't win head-on. Angela pressed her hand over his, whispering fiercely, "Don't. Not yet. Survive first. Expose him later." Marcus's heart pounded, torn between his instinct to strike and her plea to endure. The sheriff stepped forward, spreading his arms like a ringmaster. "Game's over, soldier. You and your little nurse don't leave this county alive." But Marcus noticed something the sheriff hadn't. The driver of the truck they had hidden in earlier was watching from the farmhouse porch, his face pale, uncertain. Marcus's muscles coiled tight, every instinct screaming to fight, but Angela's earlier words echoed in his mind. "Survive first, expose him later." He steadied his stance, raising the rifle enough to remind them he was not cornered prey. The sheriff cocked his head, amused, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed a sliver of unease. "You think pointing that gun makes you my equal," he sneered. "I've run this town longer than you've been crawling back from whatever war left you broken. You'll bleed out in the dirt before anyone here dares lift a finger against me." Marcus's gaze slid past the sheriff toward the farmhouse porch where the truck driver lingered. The man's hands trembled against the railing, his eyes darting between Marcus and the sheriff. Marcus saw hesitation, fear, but also the faint glimmer of conscience. "It was enough." "Then let them see it," Marcus said, his voice rising above the still night. "Let them all see what kind of man you really are." His words carried farther than he expected, drifting into the shadows where other townsfolk had gathered silently. Lanterns flickered in windows, silhouettes pressed against curtains, neighbors watching but unwilling to step forward. The sheriff turned sharply, catching the movement, and his smirk twisted into a scowl. "Go back inside," he barked, his voice cracking like a whip. Some shutters snapped shut, but others stayed open, the glow of candlelight refusing to retreat. The sheriff's control was not absolute, not tonight. Marcus pressed the advantage. "They're watching," he said, louder now, his tone steady and commanding. "They've been watching all along. Every time you looked away from the law you swore to uphold, every time you let the vultures terrorize someone, every time you broke the oath on that ring." He pulled the ring from his pocket and held it high, the insignia catching the lantern glow. Gasps rippled from the shadows. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, his mask cracking as recognition swept the crowd. One of the deputies cursed under his breath, taking a step back as if the metal burned. Angela found her voice, trembling but clear. "How many more secrets are you hiding? How many more families have been silenced because they trusted you?" The sheriff's fury boiled over. He stormed forward, ripping the rifle barrel aside with brute force. Marcus stumbled back, barely holding onto his footing as the bikers closed in, their boots grinding gravel like a drumbeat of inevitability. Yet before the sheriff could strike, a voice rang out from the porch. "Enough." It was the truck driver. His voice cracked, but it carried, slicing through the tension like a blade. He stepped forward into the light, his face pale but resolute. "We all know what's happening here. We've known for years. He's not lying." A murmur rose among the gathered townsfolk. Heads turned, Whispers spread like wildfire. The sheriff rose, his authority challenged in the one way he hadn't expected. Openly. He swung his glare toward the driver, venom dripping from his tone. "Careful, boy. You know what happens to folks who cross me." But the man stood taller, fear battling conviction. "Maybe it's time we stop being afraid." The sheriff's hand twitched toward his revolver, but Marcus lunged, slamming his shoulder into the man's chest, sending the gun skidding across the gravel. The bikers surged forward, chaos erupting as fists and boots clashed with defiance and desperation. Angela darted toward the fallen revolver, snatching it up before one of the deputies could reach it. She spun, aiming it with trembling hands but fierce eyes. "Back off," she shouted. For the first time, the bikers hesitated. The crowd in the shadows pressed closer, voices growing louder, no longer whispers but shouts. "We've had enough," one woman cried. "He's right," another yelled. The sheriff staggered to his feet, rage consuming him. "You think a mob of cowards can undo me?" he roared. "I built this town. I own every acre, every badge, every soul." His words cracked, unsteady now, his mask of dominance slipping as the crowd surged nearer. Marcus raised the rifle again, standing shoulder to shoulder with Angela, their weapons trained not just on the sheriff, but on the fear he had ruled with for years. The silence that followed was different now, not complicit, not blind. It was the silence before storm. The bikers shifted uneasily, their bravado cracking under the weight of so many watching eyes. The sheriff snarled, sweat beading on his brow, his once commanding voice now tainted with desperation. "Don't fool yourselves," he barked, his words cracking. "These people won't stand with you. They're cowards. They've always been cowards." Yet the very silence that followed undermined him, for it was no longer born of fear, but of waiting. Waiting to see if someone would strike the final blow to his authority. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes locked on the man who had tormented this town for years. "You call them cowards because it suits you," Marcus said, his tone sharp as flint. "But you can't call them cowards now, not when they're standing here, not when they see you for what you are." The sheriff lunged suddenly, his hand darting toward Marcus's rifle, but Marcus pivoted, driving his elbow into the sheriff's jaw with a sickening crack. The older man stumbled, clutching his face, but even as he faltered, his deputies moved to close the gap. One raised his shotgun, finger white on the trigger, but the truck driver from the porch shouted, "Stop." His voice cut through the chaos, and with shaking hands, he stepped fully into the open, his lantern high. "If you fire on all of us," he declared. And then, as if a dam had broken, others emerged. Men and women clutching tools, sticks, and the few hunting rifles they owned. Their faces bore years of fear, but also years of anger. The sheriff's smirk vanished, his authority shrinking under the weight of their stares. Angela's voice rang out, clear and unwavering despite her trembling hands. "How many families did you let the vultures destroy? How many times did you turn away when people begged for protection?" The crowd murmured in agreement, voices rising, overlapping. The sheriff raised his hands as if to hold back the tide. "You don't know what you're doing," he shouted. "Without me, this town will burn. You think he pointed a shaking finger at Marcus, cares about you? He's an outsider. He doesn't bleed for this soil the way I have." Marcus didn't flinch. "I bleed for what's right," he said, his voice steady. "I've bled in deserts and cities for people I never knew. I'll bleed here too if it means exposing you." The bikers, sensing the shift, glanced at each other with unease. Their loyalty to the sheriff was tethered to power, not honor, and they could feel that tether fraying. One of them muttered, "This ain't worth it," before slinking back toward his bike. Another followed, then another, until the sheriff found himself with fewer allies than he imagined. His rage exploded, spittle flying as he screamed, "You'll regret this. Every last one of you." He lunged again, this time at Angela, but Marcus intercepted him, grappling him to the dirt. The sheriff fought with the desperation of a man watching his empire collapse, but Marcus's strength, honed from battles far worse than this, held him down. With one final heave, Marcus slammed the sheriff's arm into the gravel, forcing him flat. Angela leveled the revolver, her hands steady now. "It's over," she said. "You can't hide behind shadows anymore." The sheriff spat blood, his chest heaving. "You think they'll keep standing once I'm gone? You think they won't crumble without me holding the wolves back?" But the irony was laid bare. The wolves were his own, the bikers he had coddled, the terror he had orchestrated. The crowd pressed closer, no longer shrinking from him but glaring down at him, their faces lit with the fire of years stolen. An elderly woman at the front stepped forward, her cane tapping against the gravel. Her voice, though thin, was unyielding. "My husband died because you let those men take what wasn't theirs. You told me nothing could be done. Tonight I see the truth. You never wanted to stop them." Her words struck harder than Marcus's fists, each syllable unraveling what remained of the sheriff's control. Murmurs of agreement swelled, voices layering over one another. "My brother, my daughter, my farm." The litany of grievances spilled into the night until the sheriff's ears rang with a chorus of his own sins. Marcus tightened his grip on the man's arm, his voice low but carrying. "They're not afraid of you anymore. You don't own this town. You never did." The sheriff roared in frustration, but the fight drained from him with every shout from the crowd. His deputies, pale and shaken, exchanged glances. One by one, they lowered their weapons, unwilling to stand against their own neighbors. Angela's voice pierced the night. "Then arrest him," she demanded. "Do your job for once, or step aside for someone who will." The deputies hesitated, fear and shame battling in their eyes. Finally, one stepped forward, pulling out his cuffs. The sheriff's curses still hung in the night air as the deputies dragged him toward the jailhouse, his boots scraping the gravel, his voice hoarse with rage. The crowd followed in a wary hush, their faces pale in the lantern glow, as if unable to believe that the man who had ruled them through fear for so long was finally reduced to a prisoner. Angela walked close behind, revolver still clutched in her hand, though now lowered at her side. Marcus trailed beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the shadows where the bikers' taillights had vanished. The iron vultures were gone for the moment, but their stink of violence lingered in the air, a reminder that the battle might not be finished even if the sheriff's grip had snapped. When the jailhouse door clanged shut and the sheriff's howls were muffled behind iron, the people stood uncertain, the weight of silence pressing on them again. But it was not the silence of fear this time. It was the silence of change beginning. An old farmer stepped forward, his back crooked from years bent over fields, and raised his hand as if to steady the others. "We cannot go back," he said, his voice breaking but determined. "Not after tonight. If we let the vultures return, if we let another sheriff rise to rule us with fear, then nothing changes. We must stand together now, or this was for nothing." The words struck deep, and heads nodded slowly, some with tears brimming, some with anger rekindled. Marcus felt the pulse of their voices stirring, a rhythm of hope growing where despair had lived for years. Angela, her bandaged hand aching, finally holstered the revolver and whispered, "He was right about one thing. Without us holding the line, wolves will come. But not his kind of wolves, ours." Marcus turned to her, his gaze softening for the first time in hours. "Wolves protect their pack," he said. "And tonight you proved you're not sheep." Just then, headlights cut through the dark as a convoy of bikers reappeared, roaring engines splitting the fragile moment. The iron vultures had not vanished entirely. They circled back, perhaps to reclaim their leader or to test whether the town truly had backbone. The crowd froze, fear creeping into their eyes once more. The leader of the remaining vultures revved his engine, a sneer painted across his face. "Hand him back," he bellowed, pointing toward the jailhouse. "You think this is over? You'll all pay for what you did tonight." His words echoed with menace, but this time no one flinched. The truck driver from the porch, lantern still in hand, stepped forward and stood beside Marcus. Then the farmer moved up, leaning on his cane. Then the young mother, who had hidden behind shutters for years, pushed forward, clutching her child to her side. One by one, they formed a line, no longer looking for Marcus or Angela to shield them, but standing on their own. Marcus lifted his rifle, but kept the barrel low, his voice carrying over the engines. "You've already lost. Look at them. You can scare one, you can scare 10, but you can't scare them all when they stand together. You know it. That's why you'll leave." The bikers roared, circling like predators, but their sneers faltered when they saw the glint of tools turn to weapons, the barrels of hunting rifles, and the fire in the eyes of people who had been broken but now refused to bow. The leader spat, cursed, and finally revved his engine harder. "This ain't finished," he growled, before signaling his men. One by one, the vultures peeled away, their taillights vanishing into the dark until only the hum of insects remained. Relief washed over the crowd in waves. Tears fell freely, arms embraced, and for the first time in years, laughter cracked the night sky, not laughter of cruelty or mockery, but of liberation. Angela leaned against Marcus, exhaustion tugging at her every muscle. "You stayed," she whispered. "You didn't have to, but you did." Marcus's eyes were distant, his voice low. "Because I've seen what happens when no one stands. Places burn, people vanish, and the guilty walk free. I wasn't going to watch that happen here." The people gathered closer, some thanking him, others simply standing near him as if his presence still anchored them. But Marcus shook his head. "Don't thank me. Tonight only mattered because of you. If you hadn't stood, this would have ended differently. I might fight, I might bleed, but I can't make a town free unless it wants to be free." Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber and violet. The jailhouse stood quiet behind them, the sheriff locked inside, his reign reduced to nothing more than a man pacing in a cell. The people dispersed slowly, returning to homes that suddenly felt different, lighter, no longer cages, but places of belonging. Angela stayed with Marcus as the sun climbed, and she asked, "What happens now?" Marcus glanced at the horizon, the scars of old battles written in his expression. "Now you heal, and when the vultures test you again, and they will, you face them as you did tonight, with courage, together." Angela let his words settle in, the weight of them both sobering and reassuring. She knew he would leave soon, that his path was never one of permanence, but of passing through broken places and helping them rise. Yet the thought did not scare her anymore. They had the strength now. As Marcus prepared to mount his truck, the farmer raised his voice once more. "We'll remember this night, and we'll remember the man who stood with us when the ground shook." Marcus offered a faint smile, shaking his head. "Don't remember me. Remember yourselves. Because tonight you proved you didn't need saving. You only needed to remember you could fight back." He drove away as the sun rose fully, the town behind him no longer silent with fear, but awake with possibility. The sheriff's shadow was gone, the bikers scattered, and in its place stood people who had rediscovered their voice, their unity, their dignity. The road stretched ahead for Marcus, endless and uncertain, but his heart carried the certainty that the town would not return to chains. And as the dust settled behind his truck, the final truth lingered. Justice was not found in one man's hands, but in many voices rising together. The end. If this story struck something in you, if you followed Angela, Marcus, and the people of that town through every twist and turn, then I'd ask you to show your support with a like and a subscription. It helps me bring you more stories that challenge injustice and reveal the strength hidden in ordinary people. I also want to hear your thoughts. What did you feel about the sheriff's downfall, the townspeople finally standing as one, or Marcus driving off into the horizon? And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Your voice matters, and sharing your perspective adds to the community we are building here.